Welcome to day 3 of the 2021 Stride Product Showcase, a 3-day virtual event that features innovative tools and strategies to solve today's transportation challenges. My name is Lily Eleftheriadou. I'm the director of the University of Florida Transportation Institute and the director of the Stride Center. Before we get started, I want to recognize Ondine Wells, Inez Avila-Spadoni, and Mitch Darigo for going above and beyond, working behind the scenes, organizing the showcase. Thank you. The Stride Center is the 2016 US DOT Region 4 Southeast University Transportation Center, which is housed at the University of Florida Transportation Institute. Our mission is to develop novel strategies for reducing congestion, and we also have education and technology transfer workforce development initiatives. This showcase presents some of the products we have developed so far, and our hope is that you will find them useful and they can be a resource for you for reducing congestion for your region. Today, we will hear presentations from researchers at our partner institutions that are shown here on this map. Each day of the showcase has focused on a different theme. And those of you who joined us over the past couple of days have heard from researchers and panelists about innovations in transit, mobility, and congestion mitigation. If you missed these sessions, we will provide a recording of each day to our registrants, and we'll make the sessions available on our website. Today, we're very pleased to discuss equity in transportation. And I'm very pleased to introduce our two panelists. First, Virginia Whittington, who is the director of the Regional Partnerships for Metroplan Orlando, the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Orange, Seminole, and Osceola counties, and Allison Stetner, who serves as the director of the Office of Policy Planning for the Florida Department of Transportation. Detailed biographies of our panelists are provided online along with the agenda and the program. I want to thank you both for joining us today. Your feedback is very valuable to us. We very much appreciate it. We are also joined by 6 Stride researchers who will share their tools and strategies with you today. And again, you can find each of our researchers' bio in the program booklet on the Stride website. And Ondine will provide a link in the chat box as well. Now, each Stride researcher has prepared a short video about the product. And following each video, we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A with our presenters, our panelists, and attendees. If you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And after the completion of all the product presentations, we'll have a broader discussion about future needs and challenges related to equity. So we have allocated 2 hours for today's event, but if we reach a point where there are no more questions from the audience, we might end later. So we'll start with our first product. Dr. Siva Srinivasan will present on the community-based participatory research process for transportation planning. Dr. Srinivasan is from the University of Florida.
Hello, everyone. My name is Siva Srinivasan. I'm an associate professor in transportation engineering at the University of Florida.
Hi, everyone.
I would like to talk briefly about our work on applying the Cbpr approach for transportation planning. This project was funded by the Florida Department of Transportation. Dr. Lily Eleftheriadou was the PI, and the research team included members from engineering, urban planning, and occupational therapy. So understanding people's transportation needs and constraints is very important for effective transportation planning. Therefore, an active engagement of community members is critical in the transportation planning process This is also a legal requirement, and we see many workshops and focus groups that happen when an agency is developing its transportation plan. But then there are several challenges in this process. Community members may not always be engaged. Not all people are even used to being involved in these kinds of processes. People may not be familiar, people may not have the right knowledge. And there is also the fear that certain opinions might be voiced more strongly in such engagements, leading to biased inferences. Overall, there is still the need for a systematic framework for effective and meaningful citizenship engagement. So we want to apply the community-based participatory research, or the CBPR approach for this problem. This is not new. This has been used in the public health field as a framework for evaluating health interventions in communities, but it has not quite been applied to the transportation planning arena as such. The core idea here is to involve the community in the entire process, from problem definition all the way to the implementation and solutions and so on. Certain aspects of CBPR do exist in our traditional public engagement process, but then the CBPR approach codifies the effect nicely, and we thought it would be nice to apply it to the transportation planning problem. So in order to engage the community, we first need an advisory board. So this is a small group of 4 to 6 members from the community who would be recruited, and they would form this advisory board. This board actively engages with the study team during the entire project, and they also serve as champions of this process within the community, right? They in turn engage the other members of the community. You can recruit them for focus group studies, you can encourage them to participate in surveys, and they also provide the rest of the community updates on what is going on with this effort. So a knowledgeable and diverse advisory board that is willing and able to invest the effort is very critical for the successful conduct of a CBPR process. So based on our experiences with 2 very different neighborhoods in Gainesville, we've sort of developed a recipe or a step-by-step process for how the CBPR can be applied for transportation planning projects. We have identified the nature of involvement that we can expect from the community in each step. And we have also drawn from other non-CBPR public engagement studies to provide additional insights. And since we are applying the CBPR in the context of transportation planning, we have used the 5 A's framework in order to measure mobility. So this is a much more generic framework. It captures the needs and constraints of the community members and is flexible to accommodate the role of new and emerging modes as well. In fact, a part of our study happened after the onset of COVID, and we were able to even look at behavioral changes because of the pandemic within the 5 A's framework as well. So it's a nice and flexible approach. So in the overall, the CBPR is a very robust way of engaging community members in transportation planning. We believe that the engagement with the public should not be limited to just short-term project-specific efforts. Rather, a long-term continued engagement is needed. When community members have a history of being involved, project-level CBPR studies would be more successful. At the same time, the citizens can also be trained for continued engagement based on short-term project-specific engagements as well. So please do look up our project documentation for additional details. So we go more in depth about the step-by-step processes, and then we've also described our experiences in the context of the 2 Gainesville communities. So the contact information of the PI and myself are on the screen, so feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Siva. And This time we're going to open it up for questions from the panelists and the attendees. So if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. Let me start with our panelists. Virginia, I'm going to start with you. What is your reaction to the presentation, and what is your perspective with respect to community-based participatory research, and how useful do you think it would be within the transportation planning process?
Well, first of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this process. And coming from where I just left a public meeting, and this is actually very relevant. I am encouraged to hear of the need to continue to have public participation throughout the process, and not just at the beginning or at the end. It is critical that the public is involved in these type decisions that are being made for transportation planning. And what we have seen is there is a particular item that came before the public that was done in 2012. And then they tried to do a temperature check on it in 2021. And many of the people who were involved in it in 2012, they either don't remember it, or they were teenagers or youngsters when it first happened. And so to continue the community-based participatory process throughout ensures that the memory of those who are involved is constantly being refreshed. And so I am encouraged by this. And so thank you so much for bringing this forward.
Thanks very much, Virginia. Let me turn it over to Allison.
Thank you so much. I'm Allison. I'm the Director of Policy Planning, and public engagement actually falls under the realm. So creating this framework for ongoing engagement that continues throughout the process is essential to have that meaningful and impactful community engagement process. In fact, we're looking at revising our plans and our processes now to move away from the various different ways we engage. So right now, in the beginning of a project, we develop what we call a public involvement plan, the PIP, and then we throw it over to create a CAP, which is a community awareness product, and then it moves into more public information. So there's 3 different products that have 3 different teams associated with it as a project moves through the development cycle that's supposed to create continuous participation throughout the process. But we have found, looking at our measures of effectiveness, that this is not occurring like we would want it to occur. So looking at ways to balance that is essential for us, and we're looking at creating a new product that would combine the 3 efforts into what we are calling a PEP, which is the public engagement plan that would be for the life of the project. So a lot of the qualities and research that you are showing here would be very pertinent to the work that we have going on right now in the state of Florida. And state of Florida is a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to engagement. We have very detailed resources, and we are research-based in our thought process on that. I was very curious about the 5 A's of mobility because we are working and focusing on how to measure that more effectively on a statewide basis, and using your 5 A's of availability, accessibility, affordability, acceptability, and adaptability, finding the data that can be scaled statewide to create overall mobility measures is something that is critical to the state right now as we're looking at creating more equitable outcomes for our communities. So we know that the way that projects are funded right now may not create equitable outcomes. And so when we look at ways to measure and provide data to our decision makers, looking at that information in particular is key. So I would be interested to know more about what data resources you use to measure that into project development so that we can tailor that to the outreach programs and get better outcomes overall. So I thank you for this update. This is, I think, was very relevant to our discussions and to how the policy is moving and FDOT, and hopefully that's a benchmark for other other states and other communities going forward.
Thanks very much, Allison. I'm going to turn it to Siva to respond regarding the data.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lily, and thank you very much for the feedback, Allison and Virginia. I think this is a very important effort, and we appreciate that it fits in within the overall framework of what is happening in both Orlando and the state of Florida as well. So Allison, to your point about the data collection, in our project final report, we did both qualitative focus groups in this study as well as quantitative surveys. And in both of them, when we try to structure the questions in the focus groups and we try to structure the questions in the survey, we try to make sure that we are thinking about all the 5 different A's and had specific questions related to that. I guess in the interest of time, I can certainly point you to the report and maybe even share an earlier draft version with you, where we do present the focus group questions as well as the survey questions. And then in our analysis, we try to make the mapping between the questions and the A's. So which questions would correspond to which of the A's in our 5 A's. And the other important thing is, like, with a CBPR type of approach, we can get the community members to help us define some of those mobility measures as well. Because when we develop the surveys or focus groups, we did iterate with these advisory board members so that we got feedback on how to phrase the question, how to measure things. And I think that was very useful. And in the context of the projects, these might change as well, right? Like, how do you measure various things? Just to give you an example, since this project happened in the middle of the pandemic, one of the adaptability questions was related to how did the use of the different modes, how resilient is it to the pandemic situation? So that was very specific in the context, but again, like in a different project, we can come up with the appropriate measures. But I think I'll be happy to share a draft final version of it with you so that you have access to both the survey questions and the focus group questions.
Can I just have one follow-up question on your advisory board creation? We tend to use different advisory or committees for some of our larger projects, but we struggle with making sure that we get those that are less represented on those committees. So how do you ensure that you are getting an inclusive group of people who may have limited time, work several jobs, may be coming from a zero car household, or may not have access to technology to connect? So how do you make sure your advisory board really is representative of the entire community? What tools do you use to develop that?
I think that's a fantastic question. Something that we try to put in a lot of effort. In terms of trying to schedule meetings at local libraries or transit accessible places, and trying to use other local groups to try to reach out to the people. It does become a challenge. We also want to be able to compensate the participants, at least the advisory board. They are investing a good amount of time over an extended period in the project. So I think there is also a desire to be able to actively compensate. So we had some lessons learned in terms of how we can reach out. I wouldn't say we figured all these things out, because again, the pandemic also started in the middle of this, and we had to switch to virtual, which further had access barriers as well. But I think there was an active effort to go to some of the local communities, the libraries, the churches, etc., try to meet with the people, try to get them to engage. So those were the main reasons. And I think the other issue is also more of a long-term relationship. If you suddenly try to cold call somebody to participate in one single project, I think that becomes a little bit more difficult. So if we have a second project or a third project or whatever, I think over time, we build the trust, we build the interest, we build the motivation. I think that is also a factor that we need to consider. So hopefully if we have more of these happening, then people become used to it. They see what is the outcome of all the effort that they've put in, and that will also help in the long term.
Thanks, Siva. I don't see any questions from the audience. If anybody sees questions and I'm not seeing them, please let me know. But I see we are at 10 minutes of discussion, so we're going to have the opportunity to talk about the broader issues later on. So let's move forward with our next product. And the next product is a Transportation Equity Certification Program, and this will be presented by Dr. Mary Mohebi, also University of Florida. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mary Mohebi, UFTI Transportation Equity Lead. I have a brief presentation about our Transportation Equity TE certification program that provides training for transportation practitioners and policymakers. So in general, equity is an ill-defined term, and it's kind of an everyday dilemma for many practitioners and policymakers across the country. And when it comes to transportation, it's difficult to run an equity analysis because there are different types of equity that we need to be mindful of. And also, it's not an easy task to quantify potential impacts of transportation projects. And also, there are numerous ways to measure impacts and to categorize different groups of people who are impacted. So essentially, we need to be mindful of the fact that each method may lead to a different solution that might be helpful for a group of impacted population and not for another group. We provide two sets of training, one general training that I will discuss briefly here, plus we have the capacity to customize the training based on different agencies' need for their employees. For example, right now we are working on developing a training focused on transit equity to be offered exclusively to an agency. So the TE training covers these main areas that you can see in this slide and provides opportunity for participants to examine some methods and tools in interactive exercises led by external speakers who are mainly practitioners well known in the field. So considering that, like, we update the training material frequently to make sure that it provides information that is practical for engineers, planners, policymakers, and whoever address mobility needs of communities across the country. Here you can see the main areas that we cover in this training: manifestation of equity in transportation, transition toward accessibility-based transportation planning, tools for equity analysis, transportation resilience metrics, equity implication of virtual community engagement, inclusive and equitable disaster response. So the training includes two modules. The first module is called Equitable Mobility and Effective Engagement. The second module is called Equity and Accessibility-Based Approach. Each module is 8 hours and will be provided in 2 days. The first half of each course provides participants with the knowledge required to actively partake in the interactive exercise, which is the second half of each session. The interactive exercises for the first module focuses on, the first one focuses on meaningful engagement in different environments, and the second one focuses on transportation equity in crisis. And the interactive exercises for the second module focuses on developing evaluation tools and performance indicators for measuring progress towards equity goals. And for the second interactive exercise, for the second module, we will work on measuring the inclusivity of transportation system. So it was a very brief presentation of what we provide through the TE certification program. If you have any question, please feel free to contact us using the email addresses you see in this slide. And also here is the link to the Transportation Equity Research Group. You will see the link to the TE certification program there. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks much, Mary. We're gonna open it up now for questions. And if you have a question, please post on the chat box, and let me go to our panelists for for their reaction. And specifically, is this the right direction? This kind of a certificate, this kind of program? Are there specific topics you'd like to see in such a certification, or are you seeing gaps in what Mary presented? Let me start with Virginia. Virginia, how about you?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I like that this is for practitioners as well as policymakers. I think that especially those of us who work in the regional transportation space can take advantage of programs like this. I certainly agree that equity is ill-defined. I want to know how we get closer to what that definition is, or is there one definition for equity in transportation? Does it mean something different to different people? And with the 8 hours training in over 2 days, or 2 8-hour training, 16 hours, is that the sweet spot for this? Or is it consolidated because you want to hurry up and get to the end? And also, I'd like to hear more about the implications of the equity implications for virtual community engagement. It seems like that's the way we are going coming out of the pandemic, that there's going to be much more of the virtual engagement and participation. I know that some of our community members will be disenfranchised if they don't have computers, if they don't have cell phones that have web or internet access. But how do we continue to reach those populations?
Mary, you want to respond?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Virginia, for your comment. I totally agree that in 16 hours, we are not able to kind of provide all the information that is needed to kind of understand what is the meaning of equity in different contexts. And I totally agree with you that equity has different definition for different people and even in different contexts. So what we are doing actually is that we provide participants with the definition of equity in different contexts. For example, we talk about racial equity, we talk about health equity, we talk about social equity in general, and then we provide them with existing tools and some of the tools that international that are being used to kind of achieve the equity goal in those contexts. And then about the virtual engagement, actually we had our second the second session of the module 1 a few days ago, and it was focused on virtual engagement. And we had a very good interactive exercise session. During that session, we introduced some offline tools that practitioners, planners, engineers can use to get feedback from the communities that are not required to have access to internet. Some of the games, for example, video games that are very useful if you want to get attention from the young population and also even older adults. So what we are doing basically is that we open the discussion, we provide them with the fundamental information in each subject matter that we are discussing. And then we also at the end provide them with a 12-page summary of the training. We provide them with the list of resources that they can use. So it's not just like 16-hour training, they also will get the basic information. And also we have an opportunity for another module, and we started to developing that. So we are going to add a module 3 to this certification, because we thought that maybe these 2 modules cannot provide the the depth of knowledge that we would like to share with the practitioner and policymakers. And the good thing about this certificate, I think, it's that it's not from an just academic perspective. We are working with practitioners across the country to provide this training. For example, for the first module, we are working with 2 well-known figures in community engagement who are working right now with Cares Invest. And then for the second module, we are working with one of the well-known figures in the accessibility-based planning. So we are trying to kind of make connection between people who have done a great job in regard to equity in transportation. Thanks a lot for your question.
If I can ask a follow-up question, I think you said earlier that, this is continuing to evolve, to be given consideration to continuing education, or, you're already adding a third module. so that is an indication that this is a wide open space. But any consideration for continuing education or how this continues to evolve?
Sorry, can you repeat your question, Virginia?
I was asking that in the context of this transportation equity being a topic that is continuing to evolve, are you already thinking about continuing education for practitioners or policymakers who may engage in this early on, and things are changing and they're evolving? You've already added a module 3. Any consideration for that?
Sure, thank you very much. That's a very good question. Our program just started a few months ago, so it's very young right now, and we are trying to kind of add different topic areas and to kind of have a more comprehensive approach to providing training and transportation equity. But yes, it's evolving, and we are actually right now focusing on developing a specific module on virtual engagement, which is a very important part of the puzzle specifically right now. And also it's kind of a big question when you are working with underrepresented groups like people with a disability or older adults that may not be able to attend meeting or even use the online kind of tools for the public engagement. So it's kind of a next step for us, and we are kind of focusing on that. And at the same time, we are thinking right now on working on something for engineering schools. So yes, it's something that we are thinking on, and we welcome any feedback that and you may have or your colleagues may have, and it really helps us. And we already ask all of our participants to provide us with any resources that they think that it's useful for the future of the program. Thanks a lot for your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. That brings up a great point. If you have suggestions for people that Mary and her colleagues can contact, or tools or ways for us to improve the products, we would so much appreciate that kind of feedback. Allison, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I had a couple questions about who the audience is. I mean, we talked a little bit about, is it like different agencies? And if it is, should we consider a self-assessment to go with your program, so that and maybe a way to create an action plan so that people can help improve on the goals to create more equitable outcomes? So I was just kind of wondering if who the target audience is for the certification program and the training, and if there's any ways to kind of bridge that gap to turn it into clear, actionable items.
Thank you very much for your question, Allison. So right now, the material for the course has been developed in a way that it's appropriate for both planners and engineers and also policymakers. But we are specifically working with a few DOTs across the country to develop a specific materials and customized course for them. So it depends on the agency that we are working on. If they ask us to work on a customized material, we will be able to find the right person and people who can help us for the interactive exercise, and then design a course in a way that meet their needs. But as I said, right now the material is appropriate for all three groups that I talked: policymakers, planners, and engineers. But if you have any suggestion, we really welcome any suggestion that can help us in this regard.
Just to clarify, Allison, by a plan, did you mean, for example, performance metrics? And
yeah, I think that you would not to measure performance, you could create those goals. I'm kind of thinking of it like the TISMO maturity model, like you do a self-assessment first, and this could be done in a way that you look at all of your processes to ensure you're incorporating equity and inclusion at all levels of the organization. So if we were going to do this for the department, or whether we're going to do it for a county or a city, making sure that we're looking at our workforce, our project identification based on needs, and including some of those key factors into it. And then that way you can kind of help develop strategies for organizations to become create those more equitable outcomes, or at least the critical thinking that goes with that to approach problems more holistically. I think that could be a benefit, an added value to the organization. So to take it beyond training, but to create action items for people who are going through the certification or taking these additional training to really create that meaningful impact in the real world.
Thank you.
That's a great suggestion, and it sounds like that would be a great idea for a follow-up, Mary.
Yes, and I think that's a very good point. I think something that we need to consider for the developing more modules and more material for the future of the training is also focusing on workforce. Because like right now I'm working on 2 different projects. One focuses on transportation workforce, the other one transit workforce, diversity and equity and inclusion. And then I see a big potential for that for this course too. But I think that's a very good suggestion for the future of the training. But I just have a answer to your question about the affordability for the previous presentation. For the second module of this training, we are going to provide 5 different indexes based on that 5 A's. Actually, it's the part of our interactive exercises. And we are going to also introduce data sources. It's the part that Todd Blitzman is going to teach in February. So I think that the handout of that training, that would be a very good source if you or your colleagues want to use. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mary. Virginia, Allison, any more questions or ready to move to the next one?
I think that Allison spurred a really good idea. There was a spark there that could eventually end up into a big flame. And what I thought about was also, as your participants are coming, maybe they can bring some case studies along with them, case studies that are relevant from their own organizations to add to that. That will help with the evaluation or the self-evaluation that comes before and afterwards.
Thank you very much, Virginia. That's a very good point. It's actually like a part of the interactive exercise for the first module. The first interactive exercise is actually asking the participant to provide us with some notable practices that they had in their area to kind of open the discussion for the scenario that we are presenting. That's a very good suggestion. We can work on it more for the second module too. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much. Great discussion. We're going to move forward to the next one, which is a transit accessibility tool, and that will be presented by Dr. Ruth Steiner from the University of Florida.
Hello, my name is Ruth Steiner of the University of Florida. I'm here to discuss the transit accessibility tool that I developed with my students with the assistance of my colleague Hilaire Baileri for STRIDE Project C3, Emerging Mobility Services for the Transportation Disadvantaged. This tool is a modification of a tool that Dr. Baileri and his students developed to understand the transportation service gaps for the transportation disadvantaged populations. The big picture is that transit agencies have equity goals that need to be met. Agencies can be made aware of places where equity goals can be served best using basic GIS tools. One of the first steps in achieving these goals is understanding what places qualifies best for changes in service frequency, new routes, or other transit services. The map on the slide shows the first step in looking to areas that may have high levels of populations that are likely to be transit dependent. Transit agencies and planners may have a challenging time simultaneously designing a system that works for different groups of users, commuters, students, people attending special events, and multipurpose users, and for transportation disadvantaged populations such as older adults, persons with cognitive and physical limitations, and low-income populations. Understanding how well served a community is involved understanding the dynamics of various trip purposes such as work, school, shopping, healthcare-related activities, and recreation. Some GIS tools do not provide a robust enough outcome to address these equity concerns. And few tools help to align transit agency goals across multiple different trip purposes. Thus, there is a need to develop a tool that provides an understanding of the context of an area that may experience gap in transportation service, and implement strategies and forecast their impacts may help to add another layer of understanding of the equity issue. The Transit Accessibility Tool is a GIS tool that can help to understand the transit network using a transit travel time cost algorithm. If a trip is feasible within 90 minutes, the trip is considered to be possible. The tool considers destinations of 5 trip types: work, medical, education, social and recreational, and grocery shopping. It allows planners and modelers to understand in great detail if certain communities are able to access multiple destination points or just a few of each of these types of destinations. This is a robust outcome since it can help to dispel the blanket statement that if there is transit, a feasible mobility alternative exists for users. This analysis identifies places for which this may not be entirely true, places that might be called transit deserts. It can also detect places with good and very strong and robust transit service. Additionally, the tool can be used to model operational changes and their potential outcomes. In order to generate these robust results, someone familiar with GIS uses numerous data sets, including population and demographic characteristics, such as age, income, automobile ownership, parcel data, employment data, transit routes, and the locations of points of interest for the various destinations, employment, medical, educational facilities, social and recreational, and grocery stores. The data sets then connect residential parcels to these various trip purposes. The data may need to be pre-processed to achieve desired outcomes. This is especially true when using transit data sets like the General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS, which may require would be used to show the time of arrival at different bus stops. This tool helps to provide an estimated measure that helps to understand the modeled behavior of any changes in transit, adding a new route, changing an existing route, or representation of ongoing conditions. For example, the impact of COVID-19 on transit accessibility. Transit change benefits may be hard to measure in real scenarios because some of these may require that actual buses and time schedule changes be in real time. This would mean that various scenarios could be developed to see which provides the best outcome. The scenario map can demonstrate the improvements of transit on a base scenario and help to identify small areas where transit changes would make the greatest impact. The best impact scenarios are good for agencies to discuss new routes, better service frequency, and other such improvements that would provide improve the overall transit goals. Changes in routes, the new routes, and the populations to plan for can be developed more quickly and adequately with this tool than when using other tools. If you are interested in knowing more about the Transit Accessibility Tool, do not hesitate to contact me at rsteiner@ufl.edu.
Thank you very much, Ruth. We're gonna turn it over to our panelists, and just to mix it up, we'll start with Allison this time.
All right. Thank you, Ruth. That was excellent. I think that I like how we could probably use that to make transit decision making more agile. So I think that the key to this is that a lot of times practitioners are making transit decisions during a budget time frame every single year, and we're kind of focused on whether there's influx of new funds or we're more constrained. And so being able to use that type of tool in the process of looking at where budget impacts are coming for local government is essential. I know because I've made those decisions, and having those tools to make it a more data-driven decision rather than a political decision is very helpful in making your case for those budget improvements. And I think that when you think about the hot spots and cold spots that the tool kind of creates, it really allows you to do planning more effectively by looking at where asset investment can be in creating a more multimodal network, or where you might have additional safety enhancements, and where you can really leverage different funding sources to build projects that create and enhance connectivity. And that really helps creating more opportunities and access to jobs and places. So so I think that there is a lot of utility in this, and if it can be probably dumbed down for the average person in a way that's intuitive and easy to use, I think that this tool would have a lot of merit for local agencies who usually fund the operations and outside the department.
Thanks much, Alison. Ruth, did you want to comment?
I agree with most of what you said, Allison. I think it's important, tying it into the budgeting, it seems to me important, although I would say that it provides data. For example, in parallel with this, I was doing a study for the Florida DOT, or evaluation of the microtransit program pilot program in Gainesville. And one of the things we used from the outputs of this was made recommendations on where there are service gaps that could possibly be served through microtransit rather than full bus service, because it's unknown how large the market is. And those gaps were based on populations that are more likely to use transit. So I would say I agree with you in general, and I'm going on in my mind trying to think through how to deal with that that budgetary aspect, because ultimately there's probably in transit, there's often greater need than we're ever going to be able to meet.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. I think that the goal for the longer term transit development plans and creating that like micromobility and looking at different options for making that frictionless travel more accessible, it can help optimize some of where our investments go. I guess I always get back down to the bottom line is how can we serve the most people most effectively and provide real access and opportunity to all of our users. So so I think that this tool can really help the practitioners as a whole better understand, better leverage the system, better plan for long term, and then even in the real time, kind of year after year, looking at how effective our transit routes are and whether we're really reaching the population we need to reach. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. One other thing I would point, we actually took the transit development plan. We put it into that. We had pre-COVID, COVID recovery sort of, we could look at that to even identify where, and interestingly enough found that the areas that needed it most, actually, the transit agency did a pretty good job in adjusting the routes during COVID to serve the population that really needed it.
Thanks very much. Virginia, over to you.
Thank you. Really good presentation, Ruth. And I want to piggyback off of Allison's comments that she made that are very relevant to local governments and decision makers being able to use this ahead of and in the process of coming up with their budgets. Also wanted to tie this back into the last presentation in terms of transportation equity and those who are not only transit bus users, but those who are transportation disadvantaged users as well. A lot of people who use transportation disadvantaged are unable to use a fixed route service. And so it's very, very important that that demographic not be left out of the processes when we are looking at the accessibility, and using this tool might help, especially if you're using census data that kind of shows where this population lives, and also being able to use land use in future projections of places that are in growth spurts to be able to make those decisions as well. So I think it's definitely a useful tool.
Great. I have a follow-up question then for all of you. Really, is how do we share this tool? How do we put it in the hands of people who will benefit, or how do we get feedback from potential users? Alison mentioned simplifying it, and so what process would you recommend we could follow to get there?
Well, I think that the good thing about the Esri platform is that it's very user friendly now and can be very intuitive to use. So it would be creating that kind of interactive, maybe even, a story map that kind of leverages it up and down. I mean, it's just, I think that ultimately there's a pretty easy way to create this in the Esri environment that creates a useful product. So it's just creating that little guidebook and to talk about what use studies it might be used for, so that the practitioners can dig in and start using it right away.
Lily, one thing I will say was buried in this presentation. If you recall at the beginning, I said this is an extension of some of the work that Larry and his students have been doing. He has been working very closely with, drawing a blank, Mobility for Life within the FDOT office. And this tool was actually developed as a tool for an outgrowth of Find a Ride, and then they did transportation gaps. And then we modified it to say, well, if you can look at transportation gaps for transportation disadvantage, there's nothing to prevent you from looking at gaps in transit accessibility. So it's actually been evolving over time. And I know in the transportation gaps project, I don't know the long-term plans. I haven't had a conversation with Alir on that in a while, but that we basically, I've worked with him on that project, and we have been working with specific transit agencies. The latest phase was with Links in Central Florida, and looking at, and that program itself is it's primarily targeted transportation disadvantage. But I would say that it also offers information on shared ride options and things of that sort that help even any person who might want to use Find a Ride, for instance. Although some of the transportation disadvantaged do not necessarily, the people who are not people who are transportation disadvantaged will find the services like the paratransit service that all transit agencies are required to provide. But that's one difference. So some people may not be able to use all of the options in the Find a Ride system.
All right, thank you very much, Ruth. Sounds like this we should definitely pursue to make sure that it is in the hands of potential users. Let me see if there's any more questions from Virginia or Allison at this point. And again, from the audience, if you have questions, just please put them in the chat.
Lily, the only other question I have is related to the term transit desert. Does this tool bring about recommendations for how to remedy a transit desert, or does it just identify transit desert? I know what a food desert is, but I'm not sure I know what a transit desert is.
Food desert, the same concept. There's also what they call park deserts, and I use the term transit desert. It's the same idea where the service is not readily available. And it can provide it in two ways. One is because it shows existing conditions, you can identify where the transit service is not serving populations. And the second thing is you can do some simulations. You can put in projected routes and say, would this improve the situation in that area? So both the existing conditions and the simulation tool allow you to deal with the questions about how to address needs in a transit desert? That's a good question.
Great. So we'll continue on with our next presentation, which is on taxonomy of shared mobility options for healthcare. And this will be presented by Noreen McDonald from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm here to tell you about our product that's the results of our STRIDE-funded research. This research focused on shared mobility options for individuals to access healthcare. And I'll present to you today different ways that municipalities and communities can structure agreements to improve access to care. So I'm going to start with why this matters. First is that shared mobility companies have been getting into the business of providing significant amounts of service to help people access healthcare. Lyft is doing this as well as Uber. These are options that are rapidly being adopted in our country, even during and through COVID. The reason that this matters is that mixing healthcare appointments leads to adverse health outcomes and can also, on the healthcare provider side, lead to more costly care. So now I'm going to present different models that can be used to improve access to healthcare using shared mobility. So to identify these, we came up with three models, but it was based on looking at 53 instances of how different communities and insurance companies and hospitals have structured their access to healthcare. We looked at different things like who is involved, how you book the trip, who pays, as well as what the benefits are. So now I'll show you and walk you through the taxonomy. So as I said, we identified 3 different models. The first one, which is the healthcare provider uses TNC or transportation network technology or Uber and Lyft. In these situations, the clinician often books the ride and the individuals paying could be the healthcare provider or even the patient. Examples of this are Uber Health and Ride Health. So these are often dynamic real-time systems which tend to be very easy to use for patients. So to give you some examples here so that you can understand the advantages, here's some data on Uber Health and Ride Health. And the advantages is that these types of services tend to be easier to track for both billing purposes and auditing that the individuals actually receive the type of service they should have received than some other types of providers, such as taxis. The second model is that the insurer partners with Uber or Lyft directly. A big example of that is that Blue Cross Blue Shield has some of these programs in place for all of their participants. In that case, either the insurer will generally pay if it's considered necessary to get the individual to their care. And the final part of the taxonomy is that paratransit providers, so our transit agencies, actually, instead of providing the access to care themselves through their own vehicles, partner with a Uber or Lyft to provide that service, as well as via. And so one of the more well-known examples of this is the MBTA example, where they've been shifting some of their paratransit services over to Uber and Lyft, and they keep renewing the pilot and have generally experienced shorter wait times for individuals and individuals traveling more. So I hope that gives you a sense of the different ways that shared mobility services can be used to increase access to healthcare. Thank you.
Thanks much, Noreen. And let's start with Allison for questions, reactions.
All I can say is we are just not there yet in the state of Florida in looking at our connectivity to health and ensuring that. So I really enjoyed this presentation because it shows how we can do better in our planning to make sure that we're really evaluating how our transportation network and ability to access transportation affects access to healthcare. And it's one of those things that we still talk about, but is not institutionalized into our processes yet. With the new infrastructure bill, we'll probably be doing a lot more of that. So this is a really great start to think about how we do this. But I think this research is critical because, making sure we're relating transportation and health outcomes together is important for the overall community resilience, that we want to try to achieve with our transportation network. So I'm probably Virginia will be able to talk a little bit more broader about the local context of this.
Thanks, Allison. And I think even since this work was completed in further STRIDE-funded work, we're looking at how these models are evolving as you increasingly see transit agencies actually opting to provide some of these services with their own vehicles, but in real time, and sometimes usually partnering, often with VIA is one of the companies that plays in this space a lot. So as you say, it's a rapidly evolving space.
Lily, I am here. I'm having a little bit of technical challenges with my camera and my microphone, but I am still here. Great presentation. And to Allison's point, we are definitely not here. During some public opinion research that we did earlier this year, we learned that during the pandemic, a certain percentage of people missed one or more medical appointments because they did not have the adequate transportation to get there. The challenge is that there's some laws in the state of Florida that restrict us from being able to, let me rephrase this. Doesn't restrict us from being able to use Lyfts and Ubers and those type TNCs, but the requirements for them to meet 1490 and some of the other requirements having to do with alcohol and drug testing, and individuals who are independent contractors versus a Lyft and Uber who is not, they consider themselves technology companies. And so there is a challenge there with having to meet the requirements of having those requirements for being able to transport this vulnerable population. So there has been a challenge. Locally, we have tried to initiate contracts with Lyft and Ubers, and they are, because they have independent contractors, it's caused a little bit of a challenge. Easier for medical facilities to do, as you've shown in your research, but tougher for local government to do, because there's no way around that requirement for those members who are transporting to meet that 1490.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's, for many different reasons, that's why we do see some of these models evolving so that agencies are using their own drivers and their own vehicles, but implementing the real-time routing capability and essentially call center or ordering capabilities for exactly those reasons that you're saying. We have also seen in this work and related STRIDE funding work that the desire to have joint scheduling of appointments and transportation is very high, but it's very, very hard to coordinate those systems. A North Carolina agency did recently get a grant to do that, but as it turns out, the joint scheduling will actually be a little too hard in the initial implementation, and so there will be real-time scheduling of the transportation, but not the provider is not necessarily able to do it for the patients. So it's definitely an evolving area that's highly complex, although there's very significant government funding coming from the health and the transportation side to provide this access.
Well, I can tell you that the end user looks at this type service and they are excited about it. They love that 96% performance, the on-time performance. They enjoy being able to get picked up at a time that they have designated and get dropped off without delay, to be picked up and returned home. So it is certainly something that we would love to see us to continue to work towards, especially dialysis patients who, once they get off of that dialysis machine, they want to go home. They don't want to be on a vehicle for, 3 or 4 hours dropping other people off. And, that's what we find, that's a challenge that we find ourselves in medical facilities who are able to provide that transportation to those clients to get back home is amazing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, and you see the opposite case, both of long rides, but also sometimes particularly dialysis patients cutting their transfusion times shorter in order to make sure they're done, whenever their transportation is scheduled for. So, it's a difficult problem, but I think there are a lot of public and private sector forces working on this. So it's an exciting area.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? Any other questions, comments from Allison, Virginia, Noreen? All right, thank you very much. We'll go forward with the next presentation, which is our next product is a series of microsimulation models for continuous flow intersections for pedestrian and bicycle crossings. And the presentation is by Ishtiaq Ahmed from North Carolina State University.
I am pleased to introduce the tool that we developed to evaluate pedestrian bicycle crossing options for continuous flow intersections using microsimulation. Continuous flow intersection, or CFI, is a type of alternative intersection where the left turn movement from the major street or both the major and minor street corridors is displaced ahead of the main intersection so that it does not have any conflict with the opposing through. Thus, a CFI can operate more efficiently than a conventional signalized intersection with respect to vehicular movements. However, pedestrian and bicyclists may face unique challenges at a CFI, and it's important to assess the operational efficiency of different crossing options. In slide 2, the possible crosswalk options for a CFI, such as traditional, offset, and mid-block, are shown. The tool that we developed is expected to help engineers to choose from different pedestrian bicycle crossing options at CFIs. It also evaluates the trade-offs between a standard intersection and a CFI in terms of pedestrian bicycle mobility. The main challenge is that a CFI usually has a complex signal phasing and crosswalk configuration. The top figure in slide number 3 shows a CFI crosswalk with many stages, and the bottom one, a very long crosswalk. Such features are common for most CFIs. In addition, there are trade-offs among different operational measures, such as the number of stops and control delay that are incurred by pedestrian and bicyclists at a CFI. Furthermore, field observation for different combinations of road geometry and crosswalk design options is really scarce. To overcome these challenges, we used simulation tools to develop models of crossing options for both CFIs and standard intersections. We created 32 scenarios by combining crosswalk options with other road geometric features. Then we evaluated these models based on the pedestrian bicycle travel time, stop delay, and the number of stops. The models were developed using PTV VISIM. The charts in slide number 6 show the delay and number of stops for pedestrians and bicyclists on an exclusive bicycle lane for different crosswalk options. These are for a subset of the scenarios that we developed. The tool showed that the offset crossing performs best in terms of stop delay. The traditional crossing option was the best in terms of number of stops. The tool can be used to assist engineers to choose from different crosswalk configuration options for CFIs. It is also useful for portraying the trade-offs of converting a standard intersection to a CFI in terms of pedestrian bicycle mobility. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks much, Ishtiaq.
You're most welcome.
Given the significant increase on pedestrian crashes, I just heard something on the radio today, just an enormous increase in the crashes. I think this is a very relevant topic, not just for continuous flow intersections, but more generally in terms of pedestrian and bicycles. Let's see, Virginia, what's your take on this project, but also more broadly, pedestrian and bicycle crashes, and particularly here in Florida? What can we do to reduce those, to eliminate them?
For the presentation, and of course, bicyclists and pedestrians are top of mind at all times in the state of Florida. We have this beautiful weather that we enjoy, so people are oftentimes out because of that. But we find ourselves with the dichotomy. You got this beautiful weather, but you have these members of our population who are very vulnerable when they are out, and we find ourselves at the top of the Texas Institute report each year, Dangerous by Design, at the top of that report as being the #1 pedestrian death capital in the world. And so it is important for us to not only bring forward these types of models that will help with the continuous flow for pedestrians and bicyclists, but we need to enact legislation that helps raise awareness and to place bicyclists, for instance, in a category of vulnerable road users. So Metro Plan Orlando is bringing that forward as an initiative this year again. But this type is certainly useful for engineers as they are planning the flow of pedestrian and bicyclist crossings, but to make sure that it is connected with the traffic signals and that flow is continuous for them. So I wanted to know, what type of data did you use for this? Did you use Strava data? What type of data did you use?
So we collected field data about pedestrians' speed and the distribution of the speed from 6 signalized intersections in North Carolina. So that's the key data to calibrate the simulation model. And for the other types of data, such as the like traffic volume and the configuration of the intersections, we created like different scenarios by inputting like different ranges of traffic volumes and different types of geometries. So those were not based on field data because we want to create the tool to be applicable to different types of traffic scenarios and geometric features. We created different scenarios for that.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, then the data that you collected are not from continuous flow intersections. They're from signalized intersections, and you use the information about the pedestrians to calibrate your simulation models.
That's correct.
Okay. Allison, what's your perspective?
Well, Florida is actively trying to remove every continuous flow intersection that we have on the state system, unless it's at an interchange in high speed to high speed based on the context of the road. Do you think that we evaluate intersections through our intersection control evaluation process, looking at phase 1 and phase 2 that optimizes safety first and then efficiency second? So we have moved away from looking at ways that make our system more efficient, but focus on safety first. And so I think that the key for us is that we still have areas where it is more safe to keep a continuous flow intersection due to extensive speed differential on interchanges, say. So you don't want to create a backup onto a high-speed facility where you'd have a higher likelihood of fatality crashes. So I would add some of those crash modification factors into your analysis to kind of look at how the continuous flow intersection, not just looking at it for bike ped safety, but taking it for the whole approach to ensuring that we're measuring safety for all users of the facility pretty consistently. So that Florida's approach right now is to remove them on every facility that we have. So if we hit it with a resurfacing project, we take out the continuous flow intersection, and they're only being used in very unique cases. But when we do it, we always micro-simulate with BISM to make sure that it creates a safety. And we are looking at the bicycle and pedestrian crossings because we have a mode agnostic approach. So we want to ensure that we're creating the safest environment for our most vulnerable users. So I think that from the department's perspective, how this would be, we could use this in a better frame, is that we could look at this as part of our ICE analysis in the phase 2 approach.
Okay, just about the number of continuous flow intersections. I know like several states who are kind of walking toward the opposite direction of Florida. So the number of CFIs are increasing. North Carolina was planning one, and Utah, they have a lot. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about the continuous flow intersection. So this is about just not the whole like having directional ramps to interchanges. So this is just for displacing the left turn.
Right.
And, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we're good. We're looking at it. We have it as one of our models in our ICE analysis tools, but we are trying to move away from them because they cause too many conflict points for bicycle and pedestrian crossings. We don't consider them as safe as other. When we always put safety first and then measure against our bicycle and pedestrian, our vulnerable users at the top of that.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the reasons why we're moving away from them.
Got it.
This is Nagi Rafael. Good afternoon, everyone. I think these are excellent comments. One of the things we may want to be thinking about, especially if we're doing this through microsimulation, they also give us some surrogate safety measures, like time to collisions and all kind of safety measures. And these can be integrated within the operational piece that we have done. So it may be useful at some point, Ishtiaq, to consider integrating this with some of the safety surrogate measure and give you a more comprehensive picture of not just the operational piece, but also the
safety piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly I'm not a modeler, but I do know some of the outputs from the microsimulation tool create some of the ways to evaluate how safety is enhanced through that. But I've done a lot of the ICE type of analysis when I was in project development and not up here in policy. But so when looking at it, it's just we have changed our mentality to focus on ways to slow people down instead of move people faster in the state of Florida, so that we can help change those awful numbers that Virginia talked about earlier. So, and we know it takes a long time to get the infrastructure right. It didn't happen overnight, so we're working our way backwards.
I think we only have one CFI in North Carolina. That's the one in Charlotte.
Yes.
I don't know how many more they plan to do, but it's just one.
Yeah. And in Florida, I can also see only one, like near in Fort Myers.
Yeah, for it, right? Yes, in Fort Myers.
Great discussion. Yeah, and to your point, Allison, for example, the along University Avenue, our north side of the campus, for example, the move is also here toward safety rather than efficiency of vehicular efficiency. Because we've had some horrible crashes and deaths with pedestrians crossing, and it's a 2-lane directional facility, which is kind of inconsistent with heavy pedestrian bicycle use. And so it makes complete sense to make those kinds of adjustments, and toward the theme of equity, making sure that you have that you're protecting your pedestrians, bicyclists, scooters as much as possible.
Yeah, I think of it as similar as when we're looking at new innovative intersection design. We are focusing beyond just a single mode, but looking at all the modes and making sure that we're making decisions that are enhancing the system overall. with the safety first kind of mantra. It's not, we haven't taken it out of the toolbox in any means. It's just that when we look at the evaluation criteria that we're doing to ensure that we're evaluating intersections, this one, it doesn't come often to the top because of the safety implications for others. But your tools could, change the mindset on that, right? So that's what happened with the DDIs. When we were first starting to do that, when we started looking at the conflicts and the use, we had some concerns overall. I mean, I know this is another interchange and we're talking just intersections, but when you're looking at how it would impact, would the continuous flow intersection be safer and more effective for mobility rather than a grade separated intersection? That would be something when we're looking at that comparison. But I think that you would have to be in an extremely saturated environment for us to kind of look at see how that would work and create a safer condition for all users. So since we are safety first and efficiency second, I think that anything that you put into your model and how you would simulate that, we would want to make sure that those populated to the top.
Allison, can I ask another question?
I don't know if I'll have the answer, but yeah, go ahead.
That's all right. Do you know what safety analysis tool do you use in stage 1 of your ICE process?
Yeah, I can send out the analysis. We have some Florida specific crash modification factors that we evaluate and part of our intersection design. So I can send that to you from our traffic ops group.
That would be great. That would be great.
And this is something that we're still just increasing this evaluation technique just went into effect 2 years ago statewide. But it's really changing the mindset of how we look at intersections.
Yeah.
And we start in planning and then carry it all the way through. So we'll be doing reevals with some of these analysis. I really don't like the acronym, but I can't get them to change it. I have a lot of problems when the engineers go out to the public and say we're using ICE, and they think that they are it's immigration. So, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah, I appreciate if you could, whatever documentation you may have, because I know there is an existing NCHRP, I think it's 1798, that is looking at developing some guidance for ICE processes nationwide.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move now to the presentation for our last product, which is an accessibility methodology, and that's presented by Eleni Bardaka at the North Carolina State University.
Everyone, my name is Eleni Bardaka. I am an assistant professor in transportation engineering at North Carolina State University, and today I would like to talk to you about the accessibility methodology developed and used as part of a STRIDE project that I worked on. So what we're trying to address with this product is monitoring the changes in accessibility over time and over different geographies within a metropolitan area, and comparing that with socioeconomic changes, again, over time and space within the same metropolitan area. And that's very important for successful equity planning for transit agencies. Some of the challenges associated with this analysis have to do with first defining what a city center is and what a suburban area is. There is a lack of clear definitions for these geographies, and what we typically get from US Census is the urban boundary, which includes central and suburban areas together. An additional issue is that these geographies are changing over time and are growing. So when we're trying to quantify changes over time, this has to be done while accounting for the fact that urban areas are growing. As you can see in the figure, over a 10-year period, the urban area, which is the edge of the orange outer ring suburbs, in the triangle region, how it has grown. So we need to be accounting for that when we're measuring changes over time. In this product, we are using gravity-based accessibility measures to estimate access to a transit stop or access to employment by transit. And we do that separately for city centers, inner suburbs, outer suburbs, and rural areas. These gravity-based measures are a function of impedance, which is how difficult it is to get to, for example, a bus stop, and it can be expressed with travel time or travel distance or an estimate of travel cost. And you can see in the figure the triangle region again for 2015, and that is access to bus stops by walking, and how access is higher, of course, within city centers, and then it keeps decreasing as you're moving away from the centers. What you need to apply this product is transit network data and transit feeds such as GTFS data, and some socioeconomic indicators from census such as poverty rate, employment data, and the urban boundary. To implement the product, you would need first to identify the central city, the inner suburbs, outer suburbs, and rural areas in your metropolitan region. Then estimate changes in poverty by area or other socioeconomic indicators of interest. Also estimate changes in access over time by area, and that can be, again, access to a bus stop, a station, or access to employment by transit. And then compare how poverty has changed and how access has changed in all these different geographies within your metropolitan area. If stakeholders are able to understand the parallel changes happening in poverty and access to transit within the regions, then they can identify equitable solutions and take action. Thank you, and I look forward to sharing this methodology with you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the attendees. Is Eleni here? She's on maternity leave, so she wasn't sure she was going to be able to join us today.
She's not here today.
Okay, all right, thanks indeed. Still, questions, comments? Are there any of Eleni's collaborators on the line? I don't think so. All right, so if there are any comments, we can take those. Otherwise, we can go directly into our last Q&A. And if you have, again, from the audience questions, please make sure you put them in the chat box. And let's turn it over to our panelists for a last comprehensive, broader set of comments throughout for these presentations. And anything any feedback you may have with respect to research direction, deployment, anything that relates to equity, we're very interested in your thoughts. So Virginia, do you want to get us started?
Well, first I want to say thank you for allowing us to be part of this exciting event. Congratulations to all of the researchers and to the products that were brought forward today. I think that each of them in their own space is going to be very helpful to the industry, to practitioners, to policymakers. And I am very excited to see how each of these ultimately end up helping our communities to be more equitable in the distribution and the presentation of transportation and transit in our communities. I don't have any other questions that come to mind. I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to participate today.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much, Virginia. Allison,
yeah, I will echo Virginia's comments. It's very exciting to see this. This is like research in action. So, which, you know, I serve as the chair of the AASHTO Research Committee as well in the planning realm. But this is really exciting because I can see some really impactful research coming out of this. I want to talk a little bit about Alina's accessibility methodology, because accessibility to transportation is one of the key factors of how we're measuring equitable outcomes and where we think there's the greatest way to connect. And it's not one of those items that we look at right now in our performance measures, right? So we have federal and state performance measures. The state of Florida has adopted its own performance measures beyond the federal performance measures. So when we think about creating equitable outcomes, we think this accessibility methodology is going to be critical to how we evaluate our outcomes in transportation as one of the key features. So, and we do, if you're interested, have a brief on how DOT applies equity on our website. I'll put it in the chat in a second so that you can kind of see the high level policy implications of what we're trying to achieve in the state of Florida. Just a note that about how the department and how I think other states are really working to, this is really relatively new to us, and how we craft our processes to look more holistically at populations who are frequently disenfranchised from the decision-making process. And we're hoping that our MPO and regional partners can help us ensure that as the department moves forward and as states move forward, that we're engaging all stakeholders at every level of the process. So, and that includes not just you know, ethnic diversity and inequities, but also people who live in rural areas or people with disabilities who are affected by the transportation system that may not be as inclusive as it needs to be. So, so I thank you all for your work, because we are a research-based transportation policy user in the state of Florida. All of our policies and manuals are based on the research that comes out of the different universities. So we appreciate it.
Thanks much, Alison. And I have to say here that the AASHTO and the other state DOTs in the Southeast are wonderful partners. They've been supporting us with research dollars in kind, and they have been just tremendous partners in the STRIDE effort. We couldn't have done it without them, literally. So very much appreciate the collaboration, and very interested in hearing from you about the equity initiative, and I'll share with the rest of the partners from STRIDE. It would be interesting to see what similar initiatives there are across the Southeast, and I'm sure that those would be all great resources for us as we move forward with the last year of STRIDE and beyond. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're still working on developing we have these strategies in our Florida Transportation Plan, in our policy update, and then we're building off some of the additional research that's coming out on how to not just change the way we engage, but also how we improve our processes to get you know, more processes in our thing. So we're starting with the HSIP program right now, and looking at ensuring that as we look at Justice 40 and how that will impact the state as a whole and our processes to our biggest programs, from the strategic intermodal system to where we look at more regional and the regional flow of our state, and then and connecting to the other modes. So I think it is a very exciting topic, which will create a lot of institutionalized changes to how we can improve our business model. So I appreciate this. Was a great conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide my feedback, and some of it may not represent the whole department, but I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we very much appreciate it. Thank you to Virginia, to Allison. Thank you all for attending today's product showcase. I want to thank all the STRIDE presenters for sharing their work with us today. We hope that you've all learned, I've certainly learned about innovations, about how they are perceived by our stakeholders, and there are some ideas for follow-up. So I encourage you to follow up with our panel, with our researchers, and look for more opportunities for using the products. If you've missed Tuesday or Wednesday's events, we'll be sending all registrants links to those recordings. And I know Ondine will close today with a short video overview of the 3-day showcase. And we hope to see you at the future STRIDE webinar or event. Thank you very much again.